Okay, hey folks. We're going to talk about how to set up animations, a little bit more complex animations in Unity Playground today. So I've just pulled up Hades, and as we know, any good game has the ability to have nonlinear animation. So here my character is standing and is in a idle or a rest animation where it's still animated, but then when I introduce a control to go in a different direction, it's able to swap to that other animation of walking in that direction seamlessly. So we're going to talk a little bit about how that gets done in Unity, and we're going to make it work. So we're going to jump over to Unity itself, and I've just got a basic scene set up. I have a grid. I've got a tile map in here. It's probably set up as having a tile map collider. But in order to get the most out of this, there are some tutorials that Unity has prepared. But I feel like these tutorials don't give you enough information for this to make sense. So I've got some links to Unity's tutorials, but we're going to cover what they cover, and we're going to go a little bit further. I've also set up a script for you. It should be in the description link. So if you'd like to go ahead and download that script right now, I've just got my script placed right here, and we'll talk a little bit about that as we dive into it. I'm also going to let you know that I'm using Kenney.nl's characters, specifically his Toon characters 1. So if you go to Kenney.nl and go to the assets and do a search for Toon characters, you'll find that this is a pack of 6 different figures which have a wide variety of poses for each character. I've gone ahead and downloaded that, and I've brought it into Unity already. I've created a folder just for today's tutorials to try and keep the files a little bit easier to manage. And that's that character sheet right there. I've already gone ahead and done all of our usual settings. Change sprite mode to multiple. I like to start with pixels per inch at 16. I've got the filter mode set to point no filter, and I've changed our format to RGBA 32-bit. I then hit apply, and I went into the Sprite Editor. Now, the Sprite Editor, I think that we can just use the grid by cell count. I went ahead and did that with 9 columns and 5 rows, and this is what I got. It's a nice clean slice, pretty perfect. I didn't have to do any adjustment, and after I did that slice, I hit apply, and this one's all ready to go. So we know previously that we can just take our cut up sprite sheet and drag it into the scene, and I'm just going to do that because let's call this all sprites, because this tile sheet is huge and it's got tons of animations, and we would never look at these in sequence, because if we did, it would be extremely chaotic. The characters all over the place. But some of those in the right order are going to make a lot of sense. So I'm actually just going to pull this character out. Let's clean up the animations that were created as a result of dropping that in here. And instead, what we're going to do is we're going to look at some specific frames. And even actually before I do that, let's just talk about animation in general, because one of the things that we haven't covered in these tutorials is the fact that we can take a character, we can take a sprite, and we can literally just animate it. So if I didn't want this character to move through a set of frames, but I just wanted it to be animated, if I go up to Window, Animation, and I open the Animation window, that is often, sometimes for you it'll just pop up in the middle here, but most often, especially if you're on one of the lab computers where I teach, it's going to pop up as docked to the project console animation pane down here at the bottom. This is the sort of typical place for people to put it. A lot of tutorials tell you to do that. And I've gone ahead and drag this character in, I'm just going to call this not animated as a character name. And I dragged a single frame in, so it didn't automatically create a animation like it normally has when we drag in 3 or 4 of these. So now I can hit create, and it will prompt me to create this new animation. And I'm just going to call it new movement. And I'm going to add a property. And the property that I'm going to add is going to be a transform of type position. So I've added that position there. And now you see that I have a little diamond here and a little diamond down here. This should be about 1 second. And it's made up of a whole bunch of different frames. And if at any point I want to create this animation, I simply record. Right now, if I'm happy with the placement at this point in time, I can move to a different location in time, and I can use my transform tools to move the character to a new location. That will create a keyframe. The way these animations are working is that the computer interpolates between one keyframe to another keyframe to another keyframe. So let's move back over to 020. Move her back down. Let's stop recording and let's go back to the beginning and now press play. So essentially, you could say that I've animated a jump, right? The character is going up in the air, the character is going back down in the air. From this keyframe to this keyframe, there's really nothing much happening. There's a slight movement, but the majority of the action is happening right here. So I could call that a jump, but the keyframes of the sprite animation aren't animated to make me think that this is a realistic jump. So what we will often do in situations like this is, I've used keyframing like this for a lot of things, but it's typically not the interactive elements. So I'm going to show you a slightly more complex and slightly more powerful, largely more powerful way to make these animations work. So in order to do that, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to clean out this character. Just going to hit delete. Let's get rid of the new movement and the not animated controller. And let's start by making a more realistic movement from our character. So knowing that we just looked at Hades and there's that idea of a idle animation, something a character is doing when they're just standing around, let's take a few of these sprites and turn them into an idle animation. So I'm going to grab this one, and I think in my notes from what I had prepared before, I'm also going to take this one, and I'm just going to hold down the control key when I select this so that I'm adding to my selection. I'm also going to take this one, and let's also grab this one. So anytime I grab a bunch or a few sprites from a sprite sheet, I can always just drag it into the scene, and it will do the same thing it usually does when we have multiple sprites and prompt me to create an animation. So I'm going to call this my female adventurer underscore idle. Okay. So I now have this character which has this animation on it. There is a controller for that character there. And what I'm now going to do is do a quick test of this animation, and we'll see that it's very quick. It's very chaotic. This is not really a rest animation as I would think of one. So what we're going to do is we're going to select that animation, and we're actually going to make some edits to it. Or actually better, we'll select the character, we'll open our animation window, and we'll hit this little arrow or this little triangle next to the character, which will show me all of the sprites, the order they're in, and how long their duration is. So each of these is, I think, about 1/12 of a second. Actually, no, it's even less. No, I think it's a 1/12 of a second. Okay, so what I really want to have happen here is I want this pose to happen for a longer duration, and then I want it to switch to this pose of the arms behind the back. And then I want it to switch back to this pose, so I'm going to actually hit copy. I will move my slider to another point in time. I'll hit paste. And so I've copied this sprite to another location in time. And then I want that one to work for a little while. And then we're going to have this happen. And then we're going to have this happen. So the thinking here is that when one's standing, you might move your arms a little bit. And then eventually you might, your feet might be uncomfortable and you might sway from side to side. And then you might go back to the original standing point. I could go ahead and play test this now. And all of that is happening a little bit too quickly. It would be nicer if I had a few more sprites in here, but I think I'm gonna slow that down a little bit. Really have it be something where, you know, maybe it happens a few times. Let's do this. Maybe this hands behind the back switch happens twice before the awkward moving side to side on the feet happens. And again, that seems like it's a little bit too quick. So I might do something like this. This is getting a little bit better. Probably would want to stretch that out if I was doing this for real. But as it is right now, I'm kind of happy with this as my adult animation. And this is what I'm going to be using. Let's also take a moment and let's rename our character. There we go. And this is going to be a player, just a good habit to get into. Okay. So I'm going through those sprites and I'm doing that step from side to side. I've got a little bit of a animation for idle. So now we're going to take a look at the controller. So in the project, anytime you have the images and then you have the animation, there's always a controller that is created. And if we go up to Window, Animation, and Animator, I have mine docked behind Scene and Game. That's might be where yours is. If you're the only person using your computer and it's the first time you open it, it might just be floating in space, but this is a pretty convenient place to have it docked where it's not creating a lot of clutter. Okay, so this allows us to have multiple states of essentially multiple animation clips that can be controlled. When the character enters the scene, it is immediately told to have an animation, and that is referred to as the default state. If I have multiple animations, I can select one that is a default state. So let's create a second animation to use in our animator. Okay, so let's go back to our character and let's say, why don't we create a walking animation? So there's a series here. I think it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 out of the last 9 look good. And I'm just going to drag those in. And I'm going to refer to this as walking, or let's just call it walk. FA, female adventurer walk. Okay, so once that animation has been created, we don't actually need this character on the screen. I can go ahead and delete that character because I now have an animation called FA walk that is in here as well. So now I should be able to select this character, which has an animator on it, and I can control that animator here. And right now that is set to do an idle, and I can just drag the walk animation in here. Now, on entry, it's going to the default state, which is idle, and that makes a lot of sense. But if you were to do this in the opposite order or want to make a change, you can always right click and say set as a layer default state. So now if I press play, the default state for this character is going to be walking. Now, that's a little bit of a fast walk too. So one of the other things that we could do is we can double click that and we can look at the speed, and maybe we want to space this out a little bit. Just adding a little bit of space in between the keys. So I'm essentially doubling how long this animation is, how much space is between the keyframes. Now, if I go and press play, it's still going to be doing my walking animation, but it's a little bit slower. That's probably too slow. But it was useful for me to show you how to do that. Let's put everything back. I'll let the character have a little bit of a quicker walk. Okay, there we go. Let's jump back to our animator. So maybe this makes sense, that the character would walk in and then idle, but I think for our purposes, we're going to keep idle as a default state. And when we want to, we're going to change from idle to walk. So one of the ways that we do that here is we say make transition, and I'm just right clicking on idle and I say make transition, and I can drag this arrow to the walk. Now, the way that this is set up is that there's an expectation that there's a certain amount of time that this animation has, and when that animation is done playing, it will transition to the other animation. This is being set up as a completely linear animation. So my idle animation is going to play, and when it's completed, it plays the walking animation. And it'll just keep playing that walking animation forever. It's also possible, if you want to have another transition. So I could have it transition back to the idle. The thing here is that my idle animation is very long and my walk animation is very short. So it just plays the short animation and it starts going through this infinite loop. Okay. So once I have these things working, really what I want to do is I want to be able to trigger moving from one animation to another. And that is going to allow us to have something that is a non-sequential, essentially a non-linear animation that is responding to the character or the user's keys for the character. So let's go back to our animator. This makes perfect sense. I'm going to start with the idle, and I'm just going to select one of these and delete it. And what we want to do here is we want to have a condition for when it would go from the idle to the walk. The way that we do that is we create a parameter. So I'm going to create a parameter of type Boolean, essentially on off, and I'm going to call it walking. I'm going to leave it false. So the idea is when the character is walking, this will become true, and we will then go from the idle to the walk. So we select the transition and we make a condition of when walking is true, this transition happens. Okay. In order for that transition to happen, we need to have a script that's calling that. So what I've done is I've prepared a script for you, and you can edit this script on your own if you'd like to. I just double click it and it opens in Visual Studio. Let's pull it in. And so this is a script called animation trigger. It essentially says, it's essentially looking for keys. And this is a very quick way to make this script work. It's not the most robust. It's not the best way to make this work. Everything is hard-coded, and I like to use WASD, so I've hard-coded the D key, that if the D key is pushed down, then set walking to be true. Also, if you push the A key to walk in the other direction, set walking to be true. Later on in this, there is another thing that is listening for the D key, so that when the D key goes up, you are no longer walking. Or if the A key comes up, you are no longer walking. If you make changes to this, just go ahead and save it. And then when you go back to Unity, it will recompile. To make this work, we take our character and we apply the script to the character. I'm sorry. Let's make this match the name that I have. I made an update to it, and so it's version 2. So let's make that work. That recompiles, and now I should be able to drag it onto my character. There we go. I don't need to call this script or do anything for the script from inside of Unity, because the script essentially is always listening. This is why I'm saying it's inefficient, because it's constantly checking multiple times per second. So if I now press play, the idea is that the idle animation is going to just play. There we go. That's one loop, and it's playing itself again. It did not transition to walking, but when I hit the D key, it is going to start walking. Now, you can't see my keyboard, but there was a delay between me pushing D and the actual walking happening. And so the way that I get around doing this is in the animator on the transition, I set this to not have an exit time and to not have a transition. And let's test that. So theoretically, it moves from one directly into the other one. So as soon as I hit D, the character starts walking. This is what we need to ensure that the player feels like they are in control. If you press the key and there isn't an immediate reaction of some sort, then the user feels like there's either sluggish controls or something is wrong. Now, the other thing that we don't have on this character is we don't have something like move with arrows. So if I put move with arrows on this character and I say WASD, it also makes it a rigid body. So it now has gravity. And so I'm going to also need to add a poly collider 2D. And because this is ground, it should not fall. She should not fall past ground. Okay, so there's the animation. I hit the D key and she starts walking and wildly spinning. Let's also make sure that we have the rigid body with constraints on the rotation so that she doesn't spin wildly. Okay, so I now have a script that allows me to transition from idle to walk, but I don't have a transition that's allowing me to go back from walk to idle. So I need to remake that transition. I need to select that transition. I need to add the condition of is walking false. There we go. And I also need to change that does not have an exit time, and I don't want any time being spent on that duration. So now when I press play, I'm in idle animation. As soon as I hit D, the walking starts. And as soon as I let go of D, the walking stops. I'm getting a little bit of sliding there, which I can probably fix just by tuning my my friction. What I'm also noticing is that somehow Playground has gotten turned off. I'm seeing too many details in here. So the screen might look a little different from your screen. But at its very heart, this is how we have all of those different states of movement. It's possible then that we can add more states. So our script here has something for walking. We've got one for climbing. We've got one for jumping. So it would be very straight ahead to understand how to then set a jump animation, and by using the same key, so in this case, the spacebar would be setting jumping as something that was true, that would then allow us to have a animation, sprite animation, that would be jumping for the character. So hopefully this gives you a nice introduction to how to have nonlinear animations for your characters, have them be responsive, and also have a variety of actions that they can do on screen. Let me know if you've got any problems or any questions in the comments, and we'll be back with another Unity Playground tutorial in the near future. Thanks a lot.